It is quite a privilege to serve the country. In terms of the research ecosystem, I feel that I only see potential ahead of us. So I think we just need to shift our mindset and say, I want to be world class. That's one.
Right.
Second is Gandhiji used to say that motion is not progress. So you can do a lot of motion and keep going back and forth and in chakkar, and then you'll be in the same place. But it's important to have a more directed motion towards what you think success and impact looks like.
So before we deep dive into policy and programs, I want to talk about where India stands today.
See, India stands today at a critical juncture, right? See, you can look at India in two ways. So you can say, hey, I'm a lower middle income country. What should I do in research?
Right.
Or I can say I'm a GDP number 4 and I'm going to become number 3. What should I do in terms of research?
I think many of our problems can be solved with science and technology only. So what is ANRF and how exactly it is going to help us with that mission?
ANRF is a more general purpose mechanism of the government of India to catalyze research and innovation in India, right? To help India become a research and innovation powerhouse. So ultimately the beneficiaries of all this will be DeepTech startups, companies with DeepTech or manufacturing programs, and to do that innovation in India, DeepTech innovation in India for the world. So we can have some degree of funding using grants, and then it pivots over, and then the private sector can then take it. So the idea is that on the long run, private sector is the one that scales up, the impact to the economy. So by definition, if you want to solve real world problems, you have to have collaboration.
You are democratizing research with SARAL, AI and a lot of things. So how everything comes into context?
Sure. So SARAL AI is an open source project. The thought process is that researchers are good at writing papers, primary work. That's the hard part, okay? Right. But they are not very good necessarily in LinkedIn, or they may not have the patience to do Twitter or X and other things, right? It's too boring. I know somebody else can do it as an exercise and so on. Right? So we are trying to create a single button so that we can SARALify it and put it into that.
So what do you think some of the biggest challenges we face as an ecosystem, be it a bottleneck of talent or bottleneck of people pursuing research, or what is the biggest challenges we are facing as a country?
See, in my view, actually, challenges are always there, but right. We have far more opportunities than challenges. Okay?
Right.
All the challenges are in our minds. Okay, so India has fantastic number of people. The very fact that we have great people and we have young people means that we have tremendous opportunities. Right? Our ability to think is only limited by ourselves.
So hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rocket Media. Today I am with Dr. Shivkumar Kalyanaramanji. He is the CEO of Anusandhan National Research Foundation, an apex government body aimed to transform R&D landscape in India. Swagat hai sir, glad to sit in front of you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Kalyanaraman, I can call you Dr. Kalyanaraman, right?
Yeah, Shivkumar.
Okay, so I was wondering, you have stepped into a role which might be one of the most revolutionary role, for the technological sovereignty of India, and you have stepped down from a big tech industrial leadership to leading ANRF. So firstly, how did you landed upon this position?
So first, it is quite a privilege to serve the country, and when we got independence, a lot of people built the nation. Now we can think of this as another round of independence, where we are getting independence in terms of our own technology ability to do research, and also doing a lot of nation building, right? So this is a big opportunity to serve the nation. So nothing better than serving the nation.
Okay, great. So one thing which I would love to know is when you took the charge of ANRF CEO, so what beliefs that you had before joining, and what beliefs changed about India's research ecosystem after joining and seeing the structure from inside?
See, I think, when you're a civilian, you have a lot of misconceptions about government. But when I came here and worked, I should credit my team. They are extremely hardworking. They are very dedicated and want to serve the people. But at the same time, one of the things I found is that, they are under enormous workload, enormous stress. And so, as a result, things take time, things are much more unpredictable and so on, right? So I think, it gave me a much more better perspective. This is more about the government and colleagues in the government. But in terms of the research ecosystem, I feel that I only see potential ahead of us, and how to realize that potential. If we were to work towards impact, if we were to work towards better collaboration for impact, we can achieve so much more, right? So I think my goal is to see how we can help harness and catalyze the growth of Indian research.
Right, and many times you've also spoken about that cultural shift. Like in industries, you execute things fast. In government system, things work different. So, what has been that mindset shift for you? Like, is it risk appetite or just work and lot of things?
It's a little bit of all of these. See, most importantly, you should have a clarity of vision where you would like to go, and see, if you want to be world class in terms of capability, we have to think world class. So, whether in terms of world class, in terms of running a research organization or a funding body, or whether it in terms of doing world class research, or whether in terms of world class cooperation and collaboration. So I think we just need to shift our mindset and say, I want to be world class. That's one.
Right.
Second is Gandhiji used to say that motion is not progress. So you can do a lot of motion and keep going back and forth and in chakkar, and then you'll be in the same place. But it's important to have a more directed motion towards what you think success and impact looks like.
So you're enjoying your work right now?
Yeah, totally like.
So before we deep dive into policy and programs, I want to talk about where India stands today. Where are we in terms of building our own models, scientific capacity, and these things? And in simple terms, how ANRF is going to catalyze things and going to help us with the greater goal of nation building?
See, India stands today at a critical juncture, right? See, you can look at India in two ways. You can look at India as the fourth largest economy in terms of GDP and is going to become the third largest economy. At the same time, India can also be seen as per capita GDP, which is much smaller, and in the lower middle income, we are just entering the lower middle income. So you can say, hey, I'm a lower middle income country, what should I do in research? Right. Or I can say I'm a GDP number 4 and I'm going to become number 3, what should I do in terms of research? And if you want to say be like say the United States, which has a GDP of more than 20 times, 30 times right. your per capita GDP, how do you look? So I think there's always different ways of framing that, right? So therefore, when it is in India, there are multiple things that are true simultaneously. One is that our aggregate resources are growing because our GDP is growing. Okay, but also since we are a lower per capita country, we are a democratic country, there are a lot of demands on the public exchequer. So it's important to be selective or focused and demand higher productivity of your investments, right? So that is the balance one has to strike in terms of setting ambitions and so on, right?
Right, like I also think sometimes like we are such a large population. So I think many of our problems can be solved with science and technology only. So I think that is very much needed, and absolutely. We have done great work in reducing multidimensional poverty. So I think now we can lead in science and technology too.
Absolutely.
So how exactly what is ANRF and how exactly it is going to help us with that mission?
Sure. So ANRF stands for Anusandhan National Research Foundation.
Right.
So Anusandhan and research have some relationship. Anusandhan also means reflectivity, thinking in terms of first principles. So it's a quintessential Indian term. So ANRF is set up as a research foundation for India. Before ANRF, there were different departments like Department of Science and Technology, Department of Biotechnology. All of these were investing into research. There was MIT, which was investing in information technology research, and different entities. There is Department of Health Research, there is ISRO, there is so one is that each of them have a specific mandate, right? So there used to be a lot of fragmentation, and also volatility, right, in terms of research funding. If you look at countries like the US or UK, Europe, or even Australia and so on, they have a central research foundation that gives stability in terms of research funding, because that provides stability, integration rather than fragmentation, and ability to do cross-disciplinary. When something is not the province of one department or the other department, who will fund that? So, but real-world problems cut across boundaries of disciplines, cut across boundaries of departments or ministries. So ANRF can take on these type of problems, and then we can integrate, right? So we try to integrate all of government. We'll talk more about it, but in several of our programs, we work with multiple line ministries in our single program. Similarly, when we can fund a combination of academia, labs, and also we can have collaboration with startups, industries, all of that, right? And we can also aggregate funding from other sources, so we can both help expand the pie and also help drive collaboration. Right? Together, that will lead to better outcomes, and we can go after harder problems. We can help develop new value chains, ecosystem on the economic side, or go after harder societal problems on the societal side. So that's our intent of how do we then be more bolder and bigger in our thinking.
Yes, right. So you mentioned a lot of institutions. So how exactly it is fundamentally different, its approach? Like, the way research has been traditionally funded in India, how ANRF's approach is different from that?
See, sometimes the way research is funded is also closely tied into how the financing and financial cycle is done. So, for example, often when you give a grant in aid, after a year we expect back some utilization certificate. So we say, okay, how much have you used of our money? Okay, have you spent our money? Have you used our money? But we don't ask what is the impact you have had with the taxpayer funds, right? You've taken money from society or resources from society. What is the impact you've had? Okay, so impact can be scientific impact. Impact can also be, more targeted, like translation into economic impact. Impact can also be societal impact. So we can have more focus on impact-driven research. So ANRF intends to be impact-driven in terms of all the ways that we do funding. And that's a challenge when we do lots of small projects versus doing a few big projects. So we are currently working on a framework for, both helping people submit more impactful proposals, and we fund more impactful opportunities. And then once we fund, we help guide these projects towards more impact. So overall, it's impact.
So, sir, exactly what is that impact? Is it just commercialization of research? Is it like, what is that impact exactly? Yes, and what are the measurements?
Yeah, excellent question. Now, this is something we are currently working on defining what is impact. We hope to put out a white paper about this shortly in a couple of months. But let me give you some outlines of how we're thinking about it, right? So one is that impact is very different for fundamental research than for applied research or translation research.
Right.
So when something is already closer to applied and translation, you can talk about how quickly it converts to startups, how quickly it leads to, say, industrial impact, and so on, right? Whereas something which is fundamental, may take a longer time to impact, but we can still ask the question: is it great science? Is it something that is moving the needle, or just some small incremental piece of work, right? So we intend to look at various markers of impact. The other aspect is that impact is a journey, right? It takes time for impact, right? Sometimes it might take multiple years. So rather than asking, hey, I gave you money now, what is the impact tomorrow? Okay, we can also measure it in backwards, right? So when somebody is submitting a proposal, we can ask, what is the impact over the last 10 years of what you did, right? So there is different ways in which you can ask and collect data of impact. Third is impact is multidimensional. So impact for physics is very different from chemistry, or it's very different from computer science or AI. So it is not perhaps right to measure everything with a single brush, But at the same time, we should strive for some common, markers of impact. So typically, we look at how science becomes technology, how deep science becomes deep tech, how somebody is taking responsibility for moving their ideas beyond just writing papers or writing patents, for example. But how do they disseminate that? How do you make it easy for others to understand it, so that industry academic collaboration can happen, or somebody downstream can pick up your fundamental research and make it applied research,
Right.
and so on. So all of these are markers of impact, right?
I think you also try to segregate fundamental and mission-oriented research with horizontal and vertical components, right? So if we talk about that fundamental research, that is blue sky research, like that takes too long, and one is mission-oriented. So how exactly, you balance these things, and what is the criteria to judge them?
Correct. See, one thing that is very important to understand is that both of these are important. So, and since ANRF is a single body that is supporting all of this, it is important for ANRF to support both fundamental, broad-based research. That's what we call horizontal. So in horizontal, we say, I don't tell a principal investigator what to do. They will come with their own best ideas, and then a peer-reviewed process will find the best ideas and then can move forward. So they're usually in committees, how do I find high-risk, high-reward ideas? So these are the usual concerns in that kind of a challenge, right? So that's one. Second is, these are all more curiosity-driven. Sometimes it can be use case-driven or use-driven, but it will not necessarily, move the technology from what we call technology readiness level 0 to 4 or 5 or 6, right?
Right.
It may help it to move to 2 or 3. Then something else has to be done to accelerate technologies from, like maybe a prototype stage towards, something that looks more like a product or is market validated. And so that's called the, the value of death of technology transfer and so on. So there, what we're trying to do is more what we call vertical research. All we are saying is that we want to be more directed. We want to say, I pick some either a technical area, or it is some economic sector, or some societal problems, or even translational overall. And then we want to give a focus to that. So the vertical is all about having more focus and helping accelerate from low TRLs to mid TRLs.
Sir, exactly. And sometimes you also talk about that strategic direction, like you are a PhD yourself.
Yeah.
So I heard there, like India is producing many PhDs. Now there are two type of students, like, one just want a job, and one are very curious about research and everything. And I think 90% of the people are towards job or kind of mission oriented people. So I think we can direct them towards mission, and we can also fund the blue sky research. So how can we align these people with the missions and national interest?
Yeah. See, India is a very, very large country, right?
Right.
So 1.4 billion people is a very, very large number. So India can have all kinds of people, right? So even if you take any small percentage of all of this, it leads to large numbers of people, right? So I think it is important to have a base of good scientists, right? So you have folks like Albert Einstein and people like that doing fundamental research,
Right.
And you have people like Elon Musk and others who are more entrepreneurial. Both of them can coexist, right? It is just that we don't have to work too hard about the numbers. So people will ultimately self-select based on the opportunities at any period of time. So what our goal as ANRF is to give enough resources so that there's a critical mass of fundamental research going on. There is a critical mass of more translational and acceleration in various sectors. There's a critical mass in major sectors that India needs to win technology sovereignty, or we need to be more Atmanirbhar, or we are too dependent on external forces. So there we will start putting in more focus. And then, then that will also develop people who are more applied in nature, who are more translation in nature. But you're absolutely right. Over time, if I were to ask a general question, most people will tend to be more applied, more, in various applications, because that's where the economic impact ultimately is realized, right?
Right.
So there's nothing wrong in that, right? That's absolutely fine.
Sir, and like I was just looking outside, like the kind of impact that NRF is doing and working with lot of stakeholders. So like if you can just tell me about that structure, like the kind of stakeholders you're working with, if you have to explain ANRF for them, like for a PhD student, for an institution, for a DeepTech founder, so how like everything is structured in ANRF under one umbrella.
Sure. See, ANRF is a more general purpose mechanism of the Government of India to catalyze research and innovation in India, right? To help India become a research and innovation powerhouse. But our primary way of catalyzing is through funding of various kinds, right? So, if you're a fundamental researcher, right, we have broad-based programs such as Advanced Research Grants Program. If you're an early career researcher, we have programs like National Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. We have programs, Prime Minister's Pradhan Mantri Early Career Research Grant Program. There's a Ramanujan Fellow Program. If you're somebody later in your career, there is a J.C. Bose Fellow Program. All of these are prestigious programs and also provide good resources for people to do their research, right? So this is more of fundamental research, broad-based research. Right? If you're somebody who's an applied researcher and you are interested in particular sectors, we now have sector-based programs that are available, and we are growing that over time. Abhi to shuru hua hai. So that's in terms of the researchers and PhD students who will come to work in it, postdoctoral people who will work faculty members or researchers in national research labs and so on. So that's a set of stakeholders. But what if you're a startup founder, right? Now, you can not only start up, in the regular areas, now increasingly you can do more startups in deep tech.
Right.
So now you can take technology that is being accelerated and we are funding all of that. You can pick it up if you're an entrepreneur and then pivot it over into the for-profit side. Right? Now, India itself is a market, but you can also have the entire world as a market. And then now for that, we are now providing RDI, which is the 1 lakh crore fund. So there, we are not directly funding a startup. So ANRF is now giving money to second level fund managers like alternative investment funds or focused research organizations. And as part of this, right, we are putting some money and it is expanding that money because other private investors are also coming. And think of it as a fund of funds kind of structure. That is one way to look at it. But we are also looking at it strategically. In some areas, we want more Atmanirbharta, or if you want other capabilities, we can use a focused research organization as well. So we will have a mix of these intermediate level entities, and this will create an ecosystem of funding. Now, this 1 lakh crore will become anywhere from 3, 4, 5 lakh crore by the time it hits the real economy. Now you're starting to talk about a significant amount of money that gets invested in the real economy, and that will in turn drive more deep tech startups. So ultimately, the beneficiaries of all this will be deep tech startups, companies with deep tech or manufacturing programs, or if you want to create some joint ventures, and to do that innovation in India, deep tech innovation in India for the world. Yeah. Okay, or research, development and innovation intensive work in India for the world. So this will also absorb our best minds. It will create more job opportunities for PhDs, for postdocs. Think of a company which is trying to apply for RDI. That company has to have R&D capability. Now that R&D capability means they will have to hire PhDs or postdocs, or they have to hire advanced degrees like masters or even bachelors with a more creative bent of mind, or who are interested in building more applied prototypes or applied innovation. And then that will create a demand for industry academic collaboration.
Right.
So RDI will help provide more money and investing for startups. It will also help the private sector, catalyze the private sector to invest more into R&D. And it will also in turn, it will lead to more pull for collaboration and connection with the academic sector.
I love that part, like where you mentioned if RDI Fund and ANRF succeeds, it will the kind of impact that it will have on GDP. Like many people sometimes question, okay, where is money going? Yeah, what is the impact that it is going to create? Yeah. And if it succeeds, I think 0.25 to 0.3% of the GDP, it can get that kind of impact, and also can catalyze many startups.
Absolutely.
So you talked about the funding part. So can you also explain us with respect to TRL scale, like ki how exactly it works? Like there are two parts to it, ANRF core and RDI fund. So on with respect to TRL scale, how exactly this funding happens? Like many people complain on LinkedIn, we got this, we didn't got this.
Sure. See, TRL stands for Technology Readiness Level.
Right.
Okay, this was a concept introduced by NASA long time back. Okay. The 1950s and 60s. See, when they were trying to procure, research and innovation outputs from this thing, they said that it should be at a different level of maturity. Technology readiness level. You can think of it as a technology maturity level and so on. So this was something which has evolved from the 1950s onwards. Okay, so I personally believe that TRL has limited utility because having worked in the in the industry, see in the early stages, you are at the early TRL level, technology readiness level 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. See, after you get to mid TRL stage, yeah, you can still have the ladder of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. But what tends to happen is that, except for a very small set of industries, the world does not work that way. Okay, after you get to mid TRL, technology is really an enabler, and ultimately, end customer or end consumer or end enterprise wants a product or wants they have a need that has to be met. So it is more a market pull that starts driving things than technology itself, right? So technology will have to get combined into some sort of a market readiness measure, and then ultimately, as you go towards the later and later stages of TRL, the market aspects dominate a lot more. So, so the right way to think about it is a TRL, market readiness level. All of these are, tools, right? Ultimately, you have to think of it. So you are ascending in the maturity of technology, but after some time, technology becomes enabler. It has to then somebody has to discover what is the value to some end customer, and then somebody has to convert technology to a product, and that product has to be scaled and has to have impact, and then you make it in a startup or what have you, right, and build valuations and so on. So that people often confuse technology and product. It's a very different things. Technology is not the same as product. Technology is just raw capability. Ultimately, a product is something which somebody really wants to buy, or somebody is willing to pay something for, right?
Right.
And it meets some use.
Right. Technology is just a tool to make a product, I guess.
Yes. So that gap is where the mid TRL thing is. So anyway, I think the point is that we try to use grants to support the early stages of TRL. Think of it as we are de-risking technology. If you go to a venture capitalist and ask, they will talk about technology risk. Okay, so and they don't like to take technology risk. So to do that, we as government, we fund and de-risk it, and we also partner with philanthropy and try to de-risk that early stages of technology, right? Now then when we get into the mid stages, you have a combination of technology risk and market risk. So there, market means you have to. Market is nothing but a set of customers, and a customer has a need. And how does the technology meet that need and start becoming like a product? And what is the go-to market? How do you scale it? What is the channel? So those are all the things that the mid TRL has to think about. And once that thing clicks, then you have a scale, and you've hit the unit economics. Then you can scale up at a higher TRL levels and so on. So you should keep all of this as a tool, and every tool has a limited utility beyond a point, okay, but you can still think about it as an analogy. So given that the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor has come up with a National Technology Readiness Assessment Framework, NTRAF, it's a long term, but that allows you to self-assess what is your technology readiness level. So they have like a questionnaire you can fill out and say, then you can come up with some points and so on, and then based on that you can assess whether your technology is in TRL 1, 2, 3 and so on, rather than, otherwise you can have just like grade inflation, you can have a TRL inflation.
Right, but like just looking at the structure, one part is ANRF core and one is RDI fund. So we have end-to-end fund, to support a technology and to create a product. So how exactly this works? ANRF core, I think, supports till TRL level 4. Like it's not it's not TRL is not that much utility, but still it supports to
Sure.
that level, and then RDI Fund supports it.
Yeah.
So that's how it works.
Yeah, so the way at least I personally think about it is ANRF uses a grant mechanism. That is, I give money, and it is this money typically goes to academia or labs and so on, where in an environment where there's a lot of learning happening, you are de-risking the technology. So as you are de-risking it, you move up the technology readiness level. So you use grants for early to mid TRL levels.
These are just
So-
grants without any we are not taking anything, just giving them grants.
Yeah, grant is when I give you the money and I
Right.
don't expect it back. Okay.
Right.
So whereas capital or a patient capital means when I give you the money, I expect it back. So when you give a loan, you expect it back. When I give you equity, I expect returns, right? Even though the returns might be later.
Right.
If I give you a convertible instrument, it is slightly a hybrid of the two.
Yeah, so RDI Fund takes equity or give loans, so it works
Yeah.
that way, I think.
So RDI is a patient capital fund. Okay.
Okay.
So it's a capital fund. Therefore, I'm giving money, I'm expecting it back. So in fact, even the money that comes to me from the Consolidated Fund of India, which is all your taxpayer money, is actually given to me as a loan. So to me, meaning ANRF. So ANRF has a 50-year loan at 0% interest.
Okay.
After 50 years, I have to give back to the people of India the money that is given to us, like 1 lakh crore. I have to give back. Okay, at 0% after 50 years.
So NRF is custodian of our money.
Custodian of our money, correct. So therefore, if I'm getting a loan, I can't give a grant, right? Think about it, right? If you get a loan, you have to give other loans, or you have to give you take a portfolio, right? So I give some as equity, some as convertible, some as soft loans, so on and so forth, right? And I want I won't give 0% interest, right? For example, we have given TDB and BIRAC 1% interest, and they further go and invest in, maybe they add 2-3% and so on, right? So that becomes what we call a soft loan, or a loan instrument that can go into some offering, and or they can also take equity and so on. So this is what is called creation of a financial instrument. So this just like RBI, Reserve Bank of India, is the custodian of the money of India, okay? But you don't go to the Reserve Bank of India with say, I want a home loan, right? You go to intermediate banks like SBI, State Bank of India, or HDFC, or any of the Axis Bank, or any of the others. So they are the ones who actually create the financial products. They are the commercial banks. Similarly, for RDI, we are like the Reserve Bank of India. We are, giving the capital as to the intermediate funders, or intermediate second level fund managers, as we call them. And as part of that, we also expand the pot, and that gets invested into some sort of equity, or it can be a loan, it can be other sorts of convertible instruments and so on. Whereas a grant, I take some money from the government, right, and I give it out as grant. Now, why is that interesting? Because when that grant is given and that converts to some technology, that technology will then become products, and then those products, somebody will sell it, and they'll pay GST, and the money will come back to the Consolidated Fund of India, right? So that is another process in which, so the reason nations give grants and so on is that it will get a societal benefit, and it will lead to economic benefit, even though it is very hard to predict how to do that. So what we try to do is, at the early stage, we want to de-risk, and once you have de-risked, the probability of technology translation is higher. Then we want to accelerate it closer. Then suddenly it will get pivoted over to RDI or RDI supported entities. So we want to create an asset class, so there is enough money around looking for opportunities, startups or others, intermediaries who actually are the agents of creation of those wealth creation. They can get funded, all of that, right? So that's the overall thinking. So, but we will tend to have an overlap. It is not like I do 1 to 4 and then suddenly 4 and beyond, right? So we tend to do 1 to 6 in using the grant programs, and here is 4 to 9 we do that. So there will be that 4 to 6 area is an overlap area. So we can have some degree of funding using grants, and then it pivots over, and then the private sector can then take it. So the idea is that on the long run, private sector is the one that scales up, the impact to the economy.
Right. So, sir, like there are two funds. One is ANRF, which is I think 50,000 crore fund, ANRF core, and one is RDI Fund, which is 1 lakh crore fund. So, as you mentioned, the private sector needs to come on the front, and many VCs or people still hesitates to put money in deep tech, particularly. And talking about our funds 1 lakh crore is a good amount, but still, like, when we talk about the numbers, global numbers, I think we shouldn't compare, but US and China spent 2.5 to 3% of the GDP on R&D, and India spent some 0.64 or 0.65%. So I think private sector should come up on the front. So if we can talk about that.
Sure. So look, I think this is a more nuanced issue. So you have to ask the following few questions. So suppose, I remember in the beginning I told you that when you're a small, in terms of the per capita GDP.
Right.
So suppose you're a $2,500, $3,000 per capita GDP. How much should you spend on research? Is 0.7%,
Right.
is that the right number? Okay, so that is question number one.
Right.
Second is, if I want to grow from here, because I want to avoid the middle income trap and I want to spend more on GDP, okay, now yes, I can take the taxpayer money and put more, right? Or I can take taxpayer money, not only put more into the GDP, but I also can put it only into government institutions. Like I can put it into government labs or government type institutions. But then it is important to get because it's your taxpayer money, we also want to get a multiplier effect. So if you look at some of the numbers, if you allow me to give you some of the numbers, right?
Sure.
Like if you take 1 lakh crore and you say that has a multiplier of 3 or 4, remember that that 3 or 4, where does it come from? It comes from private sector.
Okay.
Right? It comes from non-governmental sector. Like for example, if I put 1 rupee into a alternate investment fund, there'll be 1 or 2 rupees that comes from other investors into that alternate. Now what has happened is, you mentioned investors don't invest in deep tech, but this 1 rupee that I'm putting is catalyzing 2 more rupees which only wants to invest in deep tech, because my rupee is coming with the condition that it has to be invested in quote unquote deep tech or RDI intensive. So now what we have done is we have catalyzed an asset class and money available for deep tech investment, right? Now that can only take 50% of a company, or it can only take 50% of a project, which means the other 50% also has to be funded.
Right.
So that 2 rupees or 3 rupees has now become 6 rupees, okay, or 4 rupees or 6 rupees.
Okay.
So that's your 1 lakh crore has become 4 to 6 lakh crore, right, in that process. So that's the simple way to think about it. Now 4 to 6 lakh crore, depending upon how you look at it, for $4 trillion economy is about 1% of GDP. Okay, but that is spent over even for 5 years. So this itself is a 0.2% of GDP, 0.3% of GDP, right? So 0.2% of GDP incremental. And then the 50,000 crore is a smaller chunk. But even there, the government is only putting about 14,000 crores of taxpayer money. And part of my job is also to inspire other money to come in,
Right.
so that we can co-invest into the economy. Some of which we are working with other parts of government to co-invest with us, and the others are also with non-governmental sources like foundations, CSR, and companies and so on. So we have recently done many such things. But look, I think ANRF is not the only game in town. So we are, as a central engine, we are pulling something. But then there is many other things that are also going on. So the aggregate investment, because the rest of the departments will continue to invest. Like for example, ISRO will continue to do its thing, right? Department of Science and Technology will continue to invest. DBT will continue to invest. There will be every major mission that the government does will have an R&D component. So you will start seeing more R&D becoming important in as the government does more missions and so on and so forth, right? So this might come through different parts of the government. ANRF might get involved in a few of them, but then government itself is not the only game in town, right?
Right.
So government is a catalyst, and so the rest of it can also happen, right? So our goal is to be a true catalyst. We should not be a crutch. We have to be a catalyst, right? A crutch means you're always dependent on it, whereas a catalyst drives a multiplier effect.
Right. Great. And sir, one thing about ANRF is you are working with many stakeholders. And one of the things that, I also noticed that people used to say before that in India, people work in silos. If we talk about academia, if we talk about institutions, if we talk about private sector, and I think ANRF is also playing a role to bring all stakeholders together.
Yeah.
So if you can talk about that.
Sure. See, this working of silos, it is not just an India specific thing. I mean, I used to be a professor in the US, and even there.
So in US, it's also there in US?
Yeah, silos exist everywhere. Okay. See, the nice thing about silos is that you're in your own cocoon. Like, for example, I'll give you a simple thing, right? What did you do your bachelor's? What was your specialization?
Economics.
So I can say you're in your silo of economics, right? But then now you're talking to me in some other area. But now that talking means that you're breaking your silo and this thing. So what tends to happen is people who are doing economics, they prefer to do economics. They don't go and talk to a technology guy, for example, right? So, but the moment they start talking, they slowly break out of their silos, right? So the key thing to break out of silos is just people talking to each other, right? So it turns out that even in the US, there are, you might be doing research in one area, like say electrical engineering, in some specific area, control theory, but you will not talk to somebody who's doing signal processing. Even they are also electrical engineering, but people like to create their own areas of super specialization and then be within that. See, silos and specialization give you depth. But increasingly problems, right, which come that needs to be answered or solved, needs a combination of capabilities. Maybe it needs control theory, it needs signal processing, it needs AI, it needs something else, right? You have to bring all these things together. So not a single person or individual will be an expert in all of this. So by definition, if you want to solve real world problems, you have to have collaboration. So this naturally means interdisciplinary, naturally means collaboration. So while silos do exist, even in countries like the US, they have been in other places as well. So they have been in a longer time, they've been trying to solve problems also. So, there will be funding agencies like DARPA and so on. I'll give you one very simple example. DARPA had a mobility challenge, right? Autonomous mobility challenge. They said go from this point in Utah, which is a state in the US, to another point in Utah, okay? And they put a car and build a car, and you have to actually make it work. It has to go through the deserts and go from point A to point B. In the initial challenges, it never worked, right? So, but then ultimately they ran the challenge a few times till it would work. So that's an example of a interesting way of trying to say go and solve a problem, right? If you were to translate that to India, it means okay, take a scooter, make it self-balancing, and make it go through the streets of Delhi, okay, and from your home to the nearest metro station. Right? So if I can do that, think of it that you can now solve the last mile problem to achieving, feeder networks to your metro. It is an autonomous driving problem and so on and so forth, right? So this is an example of by formulating this problem, now you say, hey, now this particular scooter has to be self-balancing, so I need to know how to do gyroscopes and so on. It is electric scooters, so okay, people know how to build electric scooters. Okay, then it has to navigate Indian traffic, right? And it has to navigate Indian potholes. Okay, how does it do that? But people do it, so why can't I build a AI system that does this? So it's sort of like an autonomous robot that can go through this. So this brings together multidisciplinary. It brings together the need to break through silos. It brings together solving. So the way to break silos is to really define problems and challenges that you have to use multiple disciplines to solve it, and also to get people to become more used to solving problems, collaborating with each other, and so on. So yes, historically, there were many reasons, right? Because the funding was lesser, I had to focus more on theoretical work, there could be, I had to be more capital efficient. So I wouldn't blame particular people who took specific choices. So being in a silo also was okay at that time because you could publish and you could keep going. But now India needs to solve problems. India needs to become more Atmanirbhar, and we need to have strategic technological sovereignty or capability so that we are not at the whims of any specific entity, and we need to get globally integrated into various value chains. So all of these are opportunities as well. Now we can pose it as problems and the more we go more towards problem-solving mindset, right? So, you studied in IIT and so on. When we did GE and all of that, it was sort of natural that when somebody gave us a problem, we would go and solve it, right? So the more that problem-solving mindset is there, that's the thing. But another thing that is less is you should also have been a problem-defining mode. You should be able to define new problems. What problems need to be solved? What problems are worth solving? And therefore, how do I, as a good entrepreneur or as a good technical researcher, how do I find the right way forward? So all of these are exciting new things, and you can think of this as a natural progression. So I wouldn't want to blame anybody who are working in silos. Silos help build focus and depth, but now the time has come to go beyond and solve real world problems.
This is the first time I have heard a totally different perspective. So I think your expertise, experience helps a lot. Like, you have been a lot of things. You have been a scholar, great scholar, professor. You have worked as a chief scientist and CTO of Asia Microsoft. So, like, the kind of experience and degrees. So how you use your experience and expertise in all these things?
See, I've been privileged to work in various contexts. When I studied in IIT Madras, I had wonderful colleagues and friends. We were inspired by all your surroundings, and just like you were, in IIT Kanpur. So similarly, when we go, when I moved to the US, that was the age of the internet. It was mid-90s and the internet was taking off. So there's a lot of excitement in the air, and I was working in the area of networking and protocols and things like that. So there I had to move from pure computer science to more applied computer science to networking, and then application of networks. Networks quickly matured, became an applied area. Then wireless means that you had to know the combination of electrical and computer science type of technologies. And then I happened to move, I did all my degrees in computer science, but I was a professor in electrical engineering. So I had to learn about electrical engineering. I had the opportunity, many of the people around me had written books in various things. So I had the opportunity to collaborate. So, I just naturally ended up collaborating with many people of different backgrounds. And then later when I came back to India, I moved to industry. So there, industry behaves very differently, right? So it doesn't, the same very long-term view you can't take. You have to be more focused. That leads you to develop new skills. I made friends with people who were more from a sales side or a business side, business development people. In fact, some of my best friends are more from that side. So they helped me understand how to talk to customers, how to understand real world problems. So then it is a natural maturing from that side to solving real world problems, then understanding how macroeconomic things work. So when I served as a chief scientist, or I set up industry academic collaborations, how does that link to economic development? So I've happened to be working not just in India but in Australia. We had customers all across the world. Then worked in IBM. Then I later moved and ran some businesses for GE, and then later became CTO in Microsoft. So the CTO was earlier in the engineering side, then later I was on the go-to-market side, but all the time I was working very closely with research. So I've always had one foot in research in all these stages, but the other foot I was looking at customers, their problems, and I helped bridge between the two. So each of this gave me a lot of learning experience. Every time you go and do something new, you have to learn something very different. At one point, I had to learn about agriculture, how palm oil works, or another time I had to learn about power electronics. How does electric charging systems work? And I was running a small distributed solar entity, so I need to know how solar works. Then you can bring the fact that, I worked in networking, I know how networking works, how solar works, how IoT works. Then what if I can put them together? So all of this, you sort of tend to build perspective. And I think one of the things we've learned in our days as a PhD or as an early researcher is to think from first principles and understanding those things. So I think all of these helped me in my journey.
Right. I also think sometimes like you could have been an incredible entrepreneur. So have you ever thought about like starting something in DeepTech or anything at any point of time in your life?
Yeah, in fact, I started and failed also a long time back. This was in 2001. At that time, we had some technology that we had developed.
You did your MBA after that?
Yes. So then I did that because I learned that I didn't know anything. So I thought I'll learn something in MBA. Then I found after doing MBA also, I found that there's a lot to learn.
Okay.
So then.
So what exactly you're building?
No, that was, there's a company called Premonitia, which was to have network management with premonition, or to be able to imagine and predict a little bit of the future so that you can, sort of solve network problems. So that was in the area of networking and network management. So yeah, it failed quickly. Yes.
Okay. If you had to build something in today's time, what would have you built?
Well, there's now everything is so exciting. So look, everybody has different aspirations. So I tend to be excited about applied things. So for example, various areas of applied AI appeal to me. There's so many problems that can be applied and so on, and many problems are still unsolved. I have an interest in, say, Indian music, Carnatic music. So how does AI, can AI sing Carnatic music? That's an example of an unsolved problem and so on. So these are things that keep me interested as well.
Wow. So since you talked about AI and Carnatic, I have seen your videos. So they are very, I don't know the language, but I found them nice. So from there you had an idea of democratizing everything with content, and you have creating content for more than 13 years, and now you are into ANRF. So you are democratizing research with SARAL AI and lot of things. So how everything comes into context?
Sure. So SARAL AI is an open source project, actually led by IIIT Hyderabad and Professor PK and a lot of other colleagues who are there, Lakshman, Rahul, and a whole bunch of team, Akila and others who are working on it. So I want to give credit to them. They are the ones who are doing that work. And we are supporting them now formally. The thought process is that, when Einstein developed the theory of relativity, he was a patent clerk, he was doing his own thing, and he wrote some letters, and ultimately it went into some journals, and everybody knew about it, right? It took some time. But today we are in the world of social media, right? So while you might have a primary publication, now AI can read your publication, okay, and AI can convert it into a different mode. It can convert into a YouTube video, it can convert into Instagram Reels, it can convert into a podcast. We were inspired by a project from Google called Notebook LM that showed how this can be done. But we wanted to have an open source project that does something similar, but also we can customize it for various research workflow, right? Our persona was, suppose there is a student who is in an emerging research institution, but they don't have good environment, right? So maybe they don't have good advisors, they don't have so good buddies to help them. How can we simplify research publications for them, right? So that is the first thought. But ultimately, AI can be a research buddy. AI can be a personalized helper for you to think, right? You should not allow AI to again become a crutch, right? So, you should use AI as a catalyst to think bigger, right? And you can stand on the shoulders of giants, as Newton would say, on top of AI, and look further. So our trick in this thing is, how do we help simplify? SARAL, is to simplify publications. How do we take complex ideas, simplify it, make it in your own language? So whether it's in Hindi or 19 other languages we support, and over time we can do more. We are also partnering with some of the India mission supported entities like Sarvam and so on, and also Google is supporting us with the Gemini models and so on. So we have put that together, and now we can do the same thing for patents. AI can also tell what is the impact of your work. Okay, AI can tell you what is the potential product linkages that are possible. So we are trying to take all the good points of AI and help demystify, democratize, and disseminate research a lot more.
I have seen the interface, you just upload your research paper, and it will also create into PPTs, LinkedIn posts, so that it is shareable for laymen, they can also understand, okay, what is there in that paper. So instead of going through that paper.
Because researchers are good at writing papers, primary work, that's the hard part, okay, but they are not very good necessarily in LinkedIn or they may not have the patience to do Twitter or X and other things, right? It's too boring. I know somebody else can do it as an exercise and so on. Right? We are trying to create a single button so that we can Saralify it and put it into that. Right? So that's the basic idea.
Perfect. Yeah. So, sir, what are your overall views about AI? Like, world is changing fast, and for many people in India, AI is just a chatbot. But like, how we can, if you talk about the governance on AI, how we can make ensure like, the net impact should be positive, and like, how we can use that in deep science to deep tech, like, to catalyze things. If we can talk about that.
Yes. See, fundamentally, you have to think about what has happened in AI, right? AI has always been about how do you have machines that can learn, right? Learning from what? Learning from data of various sorts, right? So that's been the idea. But typically in the past, you have to curate a lot of data, okay? And then you have to give that to some sort of a model, and then you train up that model, okay? So you have to prepare data, you have to curate it, and then you have to train up models, and then the model will be very purpose or task specific, okay? And if you do a slightly different task, it will stop doing it, right? So it will be very brittle and it will not have something called transfer learning capability, right? Now today what has changed is that with all these foundation or pre-trained models, you don't have to train them, you can go ask questions. So you can skip one big step, no preparation of data, no training, direct questions. So it starts to feel more like search and so on, right? So suddenly it has lowered the bar and so on. And then this also tends to have more transfer learning capabilities. And, it just turned out that, things like language and the transformer model was very helpful, not just in language, and then it was helpful in images, it was helpful in time series, all kinds of things, right? So now what is happening is that you can start modeling science. You can model a partial differential equation. Okay, so a partial differential equation, typically to solve it, you use operators. Right now, you can use neural networks to model operators. Okay, so these are called neural operators. So you can use diffusion techniques to simulate or sort of sample distributions. In this case, you can sample distributions of, say, molecular phenomena, or you can sample distributions of biological phenomena. So this makes it, it sort of gives you an equivalence of simulations. So then you can use reinforcement learning to choose which experiments to do. So that's called an experiment design problem. So then people, when they step back, they saw typically how you do science is if I want to discover some new mathematics or discover some new thing, it is highly a knowledge intensive process. You have to come up with hypothesis generation, and you have to have knowledge thing. So now since the large language models and others anyway are good at that, so they can also help in the knowledge discovery portion. Of course, there is a long way to go. It is not perfect, but it still cannot make the Einstein type of brilliant leaps and so on and so forth. But increasingly, it can start doing many more hypotheses and helping you on that. So it can help you in the discovery of new knowledge. It can aid a scientist or a co-scientist, etc. It can help model equations and solving them. So rather than doing a classic high-performance computing and numerical simulations, you can do forward passes on neural operators. That is tens of thousands of times or even a million times faster. So then, or you can simulate molecular and biological phenomena. You can start doing experiments. Now it starts coming together in terms of the entire loop of science. You can accelerate. So if you say deep tech, so first you take science, and then how do I then convert to tech? Then when I do tech, how do I, typically I do design, and then I will have actual operations and products, and there is things like Industry 4.0, digital twins, all of that. But now this entire model, physics model and so on, can be embedded in those digital twins. So we believe that the entire area of how science is going to get done, how engineering is going to get done, how you can quickly accelerate from deep science to deep tech, how digital twins are going to evolve. All of this is going to get revolutionized. So, and also things like CAD, CAM, high performance computing, all of this is going to get changed. And by the way, since you know that AI can also generate code much better, scientific coding can be better. Even in fact, if you were to optimize coding like CUDA and other sorts of scientific coding, all of that can be much better, right? So we think that all of this will lead to a higher, faster rate of productivity in science, and since new science and new engineering can help drive more progress, it's very important for India to get part of the journey and start contributing to this as well.
Right. So you use AI in your day-to-day life, like at a lot of places. But another aspect to this is like, with lot of abundance use of AI, cognitive abilities are going to decline in future. Even everyone talks about that. So where we find that balance and in terms of governance, and do you have any opinions on that?
See, I think it's certainly it's a concern which you cannot easily diminish, right? But at the same time, humans have shown themselves to be vastly resilient. See, kids who have grown up in the world of social media, they are in the world of the internet, or what we call digital natives and so on, right? They have had a very different ability. People used to say playing video games was very bad, but kids have had a very different experience and so on. So it would be not correct for me to sort of use a broad brush and say everything is bad, okay? Because I don't know what is good or what is bad, right? What do I know? But at the same time, we should be mindful of the dangers, right? So mindful of the dangers of, again, as I try to say, you should not make something a crutch. The more you are starting to rely on it like a crutch versus you're trying to rely on it as a catalyst, or you're standing on its shoulders, think bigger, keep your mind active, and so you will be better off, right? So that is clearly something one can say. There is dangers of somebody going to one side or the other. That certainly exists. So I think we all have to help each other in this journey, because whether we want it or not, technology is going to change rapidly.
Right.
And certain guardrails, certain governance. On one hand, it's like social media before the age of 15, etc. should not use. So at some point, when society feels that it's time to much more tightly regulate something, that will be done at some point, right?
Yeah,
but,
So,
but I think right now the innovation is going at such a fast clip.
Exactly.
So it's very hard to see where the end game is going to be like. So and we also think it is a real challenge that jobs and tasks will change rapidly, and typically in any economic transition, the capacity that gets created because of that has to be entrepreneurs have to find new opportunities. Right. It takes more time to change. And suppose you don't have that time, it can cause faster disruptions. So all of these are real worries that one has to consider.
Right. So I think world is changing too fast, and we need to cope up, and eventually we need to lead also at many places.
Yeah.
So if we can talk about the many programs that are going under ANRF, like there are many things going on.
Yeah.
So just talk about that, how we are coping up with the world.
Sure. See, first thing, coping up with the world is we have a lot of young people. India's demographic dividend is the most important, superlative advantage we have. Young people have the more ability to learn. They are less rigid in their thinking, so they are more flexible. So I think we believe that very fact that we have a demographic advantage will give us the ability to change, right? Versus somebody who does not have that demographic advantage, right? So that's number one. Number two is in terms of our programs, ANRF, as I briefly mentioned earlier, we have broad-based horizontal programs which support hundreds of projects across the country in various disciplines or interdisciplinary work and all that. We support hundreds of postdoctoral fellowships, typically more at a more senior level, right? So postdoctoral fellowships, we do Ramanujan fellowships and other sorts of fellowships. We are also looking at the intersection of social science, humanities, and science and technology in different ways. Even primary programs, we have quantitative social sciences, we have a convergence centers program. All of these are foundational things that we do.
I was looking at many programs out there, like on India's map there, like Mahavi and lot of things.
Yes.
So you can talk about that.
Yes, absolutely. And then the vertical programs are where we are doing more directed innovation. So we have mission mode programs, what we call MAHA, which stands for Mission for Advancement of High Impact Areas. So MAHA. Okay. MAHA electric vehicles. So so we have a focus on that, and there are projects around tropical batteries. Right? How do we have batteries for India, or for our tropical conditions like India? How do we have power electronics and other things which are more frugal, which are meeting the challenges of India, right? Our roads are more bumpy, our heat and other stresses are different. We have two-wheelers, three-wheelers, all of those sorts of things, right? How do we have power electronics innovations for that, motors, drives, and then given the fact that we have the challenges with rare earth and so on, right? So how do we do either rare earth free or reduced amount of rare earth type things, right? So that's an example of and then we have around charging infrastructure. So how should charging infrastructure evolve in India, and so on. So all of this is part of the EV mission, right? So that's the thing. Then similarly, we have other programs in 2D materials like graphene and other sorts of things. So we plan to set up a research fab and innovation hub in that area. So there is a bunch of proposals being evaluated there. We are doing an AI for science and engineering program where AI is meeting science and engineering. We talked about a lot of that. There is a program on medical technologies, MedTech, that involves medicine coming together with technology. And we want to look at devices, diagnostics, implants, and so on. So there's a mission mode program there. We have partnership with ICMR, Gates Foundation, and so on. So we have other programs around critical raw materials. We are going to be launching a program on drones for components and sub-assemblies shortly, and things like this, right? So then we have broad-based MAHA programs. One MAHA program we are thinking of launching in societal innovation. There are many problems of, as you know, in society, whether it's pollution, air pollution, or reimagining agriculture, or radical energy efficiency. How do we handle climate change? Landslides, disaster management. There is all the way to sports and other sorts of things, right? So, or biodiversity. There are many such areas, community health, and so on. So we are putting together a broad-based program, but we are asking for proposals which will be consortium proposals that will give a leapfrog innovation or leapfrog demonstrators to say that don't just give me a small point problem and so on. Show me a technology that can make a big dent on the problem. Show me, demonstrate it at scale, demonstrate it at a non-trivial scale, and and show me the leapfrog is also how do I leapfrog to mid TRLs and cross the chasm in some sense, right? So how do I show and demonstrate that it can potentially scale up, right? So which means that then it can do another leapfrog and it can scale up as well, right? So it's a program we plan to support.
Exactly how that transfer happens, like someone comes with the technology, and then we need to scale the technology. So how did you that transition and the transfer part, ANRF of course supported till TRL 4, and then they have to hand over it to RDIF and then to support through that. Like you're talking about death value of startups. So how did that transition happen smoothly?
See, so there's no question of smooth transition. Okay. So the real world is all messy. Okay. So we only have to do things so that we change the conditions, so that we increase the probability of translation. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to set up translational centers, research centers.
Right.
In fact, today there is a deadline for ATRI, which is our ANRF Translational Research and Innovation Center. So we plan to set up many centers which are only focused on translation. Okay. So that we can have like pilot scale manufacturing. We can have a center which really takes lab to market and that sort of things, right? So and it can have a consortium of companies that can work together and really focus on translation. And then that is in TRL 4 to 7. And then as part of that, you can translate also to a startup that is funded by RDI, right? So that's the idea. So you can also do different things for either not just a narrow single technology, but for a classes of technology and so on. So that's an example of a program we have over there. So there is no silver bullet. We are trying to lay the foundation for science and engineering and support the base in So without deep science, there's no deep tech. So you need
Right.
that ecosystem of basic science, curiosity-driven research. All of this is important. And then once you have a foundation of that and you have a critical mass of that, then in parallel we start having these more sector-based accelerators. We have the PAIR program that can help broaden the distribution of excellence to more institutions that does this. So that broadens the ecosystem of researchers. And then we have these translational programs, societal programs. So we think of all of this as a bouquet of capabilities. All of this are grant programs, right? And then this will raise things to become ripe enough so that fruit can be plucked and moved over. Who will pluck that fruit? How will it translate? All of that is going to be the job of entrepreneurs to do. And then if there is enough funding, there will be more incentive for entrepreneurs to pluck the fruit and take that transition. So I think our goal is to set the conditions for a much more vibrant India and a much more vibrant research in our society. Right?
Yeah,
so that's the thinking.
Right.
And again, to be a catalyst, right? We can't be a crutch. We can't be the only game in town. But by doing a bouquet of these things, and if it clicks, then we'll invest more, right? So we want to change the productivity of research to be higher. We want to collaborate for impact. We want to get into the habit of doing this more and more. And then, typically one of the lessons in finance is that once you have a greater productivity or higher return on investment, as they say, more capital will come. So then, we can attract a lot more funding.
Right.
That 0.7 will go to 1, it will go to 2, and it will go there. So when people say the 0.7 and so on, they actually have gotten backwards. Once you have a higher productivity society, it will automatically draw in more investment. But they are also correct that if you don't have critical mass, you'll never get to that higher productivity society. So our goal is to get to a critical mass of researchers, critical mass of research getting done. But how you do that research, how you get into a habit of collaboration, all of this is equally important. And so my goal is to set up this tapestry in a way that it sets the conditions for greater human resource capability, our infrastructure of our minds, our network, our social networks, our ability to translate innovation, and so on, right? And then this becomes, and also vibrancy. That's why I encourage people to do more webinars. I encourage people to talk to colleagues like yourselves, so that this idea of using social media as a medium for research,
right.
And use SARAL and things of that nature, right? So all of that increases vibrancy. So it is not like a single bullet, right? So all of these together raise the average quality and quantity of the research ecosystem in India. And then which will be the Elon Musk will come from there, who will be the thing, right? That I can't predict. So the idea is to set the conditions in countries which have done before, like for example, when NSF was founded 75 years back, they called it science the endless frontier. So they supported science for a very, very long time. Okay, and out of it came Nobel Prizes, the entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth, of course. And then there was DARPA and so on, which did more targeted research. Now, India doesn't have the luxury of 75 years. We've got to get on with it and do it much faster. So the Honorable Prime Minister has asked us to move much faster. So we have a shorter time to do it. We only have time till Viksit Bharat, and we've got to get our act together.
Yeah, we have to do a lot of things simultaneously. At the same time.
Yeah, and we have a demographic dividend that lasts in the next 20-25 years. We've got to help grow that and take advantage of that, right? So our goal is to therefore do all of these simultaneously together. And then as we are starting to hit, runs on the board and so on, right? Then you can double down and do a lot more, right? Like what India did yesterday in the cricket match.
Right. So what do you think, like some of the biggest challenges we face as an ecosystem, like be it a bottleneck of talent or bottleneck of people pursuing research, or what is the biggest challenges we are facing as a country?
See, in my view, actually, the challenges are always there, but we have far more opportunities than challenges. Okay?
Right.
All the challenges are in our minds. Okay, so India has fantastic number of people. The very fact that we have great people and we have young people means that we have tremendous opportunities. Right. Our ability to think is only limited by ourselves. Right. Or how we get educated, or how whether we choose to think in terms of first principles and so on and so forth. Right. Now, unlike in the past, we now have access to social media. We now have access to knowledge that is dispersed quite a lot. So we can choose to learn from all of this. We should just filter out all the negative noise and focus on the positives and then sing, right? So I believe that our opportunities is to look at all the positives we can gain with the new forms of media, how we can quickly learn, how do we get our ecosystems to start clicking together, and so on. So there is always two ways, directions in which things can go. But I strongly believe that our opportunities are far, far, far more than our challenges are at any remotest way.
Yeah, I think one of the major challenges mindset. Like, for a long time, people used to believe that India is just a follower of Western science, and now we are creating such incredible things here in India.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the shift that is happening right now. So you are also seeing that shift, maybe.
अरे यार, so our अपने लोग जाके उसे भी करते हैं ना. It's not like
Exactly.
so it's not like particularly you can just there is and it's just a different environment, different mindset, and so on. You apply the same mindset, apply similar standards, make it world class. Then why can't we expect great things come out of here, right? So
Right.
and of course ecosystem and the ability for things to come together, ability to build big markets or address them, all of those are TBD. We have to work on all of these. But I think at least at a raw and fundamental level, our ability, our young people, our demographic dividend, and the fact that we have relative open access despite the current challenges to global markets, these are all our pluses, right? How we plan to use them and choose this thing, right? So that's why we are seeing a lot of interest in RDI, right? So we have a tremendous response for our second level fund managers,
Right.
and we plan to choose some of them. So we expect that then will give a jump start, and then it will create a positive cycle.
Yeah, I think we need more people like you, who come back to India. You took that plunge, right? So I think we need more people like you. We need more science literate entrepreneurs, technocrats. I think that is the need of the hour. And it is happening. Many science literate entrepreneurs are coming out of India. You also mentioned sometimes ki every Einstein can't be Elon Musk or every so if you can talk about that,
Yeah, first I think we don't have to wait for people to come back. Okay, that is a small set of people who might choose to come back and so on, depending upon their personal preferences or others.
So what drive you to come back?
It's just a very personal thing. We wanted our children to grow up in India, and we wanted to be closer to our families. So that was the primary motivation. And by the way, there was also opportunities from a job perspective, but I chose to go to industry rather than academia, right? So that's very personal choice. But increasingly, different people come for different reasons and so on. But we hopefully, as the environment grows, there'll be many more reasons to people to come back and go and so on. There's nothing wrong in going somewhere and developing global experiences, similarly coming back. So we would expect, all of that, the people become our ambassadors, and diasporas are huge strength. So, but at the same time, just the raw talent that is here within India. So I think whether it's, and not just the IITs and so on, way beyond, there's enormous amount of talent. People have the hunger to go solve real problems. I think those are the clear markers of a country's potential and strength. And then how do we, whether it's from a funding standpoint or from all these other standpoints, how do we support that and be the right kind of catalyst, right? So there will never be enough resources to support all of that. But that's one of the other thing about Einstein and Elon Musk is all about specialization, right? See, when somebody wants to do deep science, they make also a career choice. They make a lifestyle choice that they want to work in academia. They want that freedom, and they want to be able to think long term and so on and so forth. So we need to find ways to support them. Society supports them, and of course they have to be competitive in their own right. But they have to think big, and they have to aim big and solve problems. And that disseminates through various media forms, whether writing papers is also a form of media. In those days, very long time back, before the existence of the printing press, how did ideas travel, right? Versus now, after the printing press, ideas travel faster. Now you have various forms of media, ideas can travel even faster. So that's why we think that the velocity or dissemination of ideas can be much faster now than things. And we do expect that not everybody can be, Einstein, right? Not everybody can be Elon Musk. So, but we'd like to ensure that the ideas of Einstein can percolate to Elon Musk, Elon Musk and Einstein can talk to each other from time to time, right? So,
Right.
so anyway, so that's what I meant. So what I meant is that we don't want to change who people fundamentally are. There is a value to specialization. And not everybody needs to be everything. Not everybody should be generalist. I think so. We should think of technology at a societal level having to go through the journey of transition, diffusion, and so on. But individuals, it has to ultimately hand off. It's like a baton race that goes from place to place. But at the same time, we have to have enough overlaps, enough collaboration, and enough contexts, like whether it's academia or research parks and other forms of vibrancy, the industry clusters. All of these are all part of the milieu of what is needed for such a transition.
Yeah, great. I think we need more people like you. So on the ending note, if you can share a message for people, like everyone is saying, this is the best time to be in India. This is the best time to build in India. So any message for the young entrepreneurs, researchers, and everyone out there, how everything is going to change and how they can align themselves with the national interest.
Yeah. See, I think I certainly believe it's a wonderful time to live, right? Yeah. So, there will always be, every time there was some change will be happening. When I grew up, there was some internet was going on, and people think, oh, internet is going to take your job. Okay, now AI is going to take your job, etc. There will always be opportunities and so on. But I think every new technology brings its opportunity to really make societal impact and bigger impact and so on. So I think the right frame of mind is, what is the impact can you have with your work? How do you go about it? And how can you be creative, and how do you harness the resource? That's fundamentally what entrepreneurial thinking means. So India is in a great spot because we are now definitely more open economy. We are a vibrant economy. We have the demographics with us. We have been showing that we are growing steadily. We have a stable political system. We are a democratic system. And we are well connected to the globe. We have free trade agreements with different parts. It'll be much nicer if there were more world trade agreements, but now we are in a world of free trade agreements and so on. So, and then other countries wants to come and trade with us a lot more. They look at our enormous 1/6 of the world's population and so on, right? So, while yes, we continue to have societal problems and grow, but one has to understand we had far more problems earlier, right? So we don't know the context that our parents, our forefathers lived through. So we are in a very different world. The range of opportunities is far more. So I think as we grow towards the next 20-25 years, the Viksit Bharat journey, it is absolutely correct to say that the range of opportunities, the range of things as we go to middle income and so on, our disposable income will grow, which means we'll be doing a lot more things. There'll be a lot more discretionary spending of various kinds, which will grow new things. Our market itself will grow, but at the same time, the world market is many, many times more than the Indian market. And the fact that we have access to world markets means that you can be an entrepreneur in India serving the world. You can be a deep tech entrepreneur in India for the world. Right, and you can have partners in our diaspora elsewhere, or other. You can imagine a world of founders. There can be one founder in India, one founder in the US, and together you can access the global market, or perhaps in Europe and so on. So I think there's a brave new world in terms of the possibilities of different things. But one thing is, the future always comes with lots of surprises and different things. It is more than what you imagined as well. So always be open to new experiences, and say that's what I would say. So my message for youngsters is, be positive, always have a growth mindset, and I can tell you that our parents and so on had a lot more difficult times they went through, and we are standing on their shoulders as giants. Similarly, you guys are standing on whatever we have left for you, and then you will also be setting the stage for your next generation and so on. But the vibrancy and the opportunities will continue to be there. But but there is a responsibility that you have to take responsibility for the opportunity, go after it, and do great things. Right? Be positive.
Great. Thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Really had a great time and so much to learn from you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful discussion.
Thank you.